I'm Rick Green, local editor of the Oklahoman. With me today is Michael McNutt, our chief Capitol correspondent. This is our final look at the election before the vote. We've been meeting here on Fridays, and Tuesday's the big day, Michael, correct?
Correct.
I don't have that date wrong, do I?
No, you're right.
November 6th.
November 6th.
We're going to vote, of course, the presidential ballot. A lot of state issues coming up. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to see.
Well, of course, the big issue is the presidential election. It's a chance where everybody gets to vote for our leader. And even though technically, it's our probably most distant vote and least effective, that's the one that draws people out. We'll have our biggest turnout during presidential election years. And early voting starts today, and already we've seen some pretty good lines at the Oklahoma County Election Board where people can vote in person today, Saturday, and Monday.
And there's not a lot of mystery on how that vote's going to go. That'll trend toward Republican as the state gets redder and redder. And I think you were mentioning that voter registration indicates that, and it continues to grow on the Republican side.
Correct. We've seen this the past 20 years especially, but it goes back about since the 1960s. We've seen a gradual shift from a Democratic-controlled state where more than 80% of registered voters were Democrat. And Democrats controlled just about every statewide office, both seats of the legislature and our congressional delegation. Now we've almost become full circle because both houses of the legislature are Republican, all the executive state offices are Republican, our congressional delegation is all Republican but one, and that could change Tuesday.
There's a lone Democrat in our congressional delegation in the 2nd District, and that's up for grabs. And if that goes Republican, our whole delegation will be Republican at
Correct.
that point.
And Representative Bourne decided not to seek re-election, so an open seat always becomes a kind of a free-for-all, and especially even though it's a strongly Democratic district, because of the Republican gains and the Republican Party, they're out, they smell blood, they see that this is a great chance for them to claim the entire congressional delegation. So this year, the cutoff for registration was October 12th for Tuesday's election. We saw about 116,000 new registered voters, and of those, about 60,000 were Republican. So they had a 3-to-1 gain over Democrats so far this year. And even independents showed a more net increase in voter registration than Democrats, which is unusual. So I think that's a trend that, there's no reason, you don't have to declare your party when you're voting general election. You can be an independent, be Democrat, Republican. So if you're going to change your voter registration, that's already showing a commitment to vote for that party. And since Republican numbers are so large, that's an indication that the Republican should do well Tuesday. The Democrats really had no response. They thought they were doing pretty well. But they think they'll have maybe a surprise or two, but it's going to be a long night, I'm afraid, for the Democratic Party. And they realize that. It's, that they think because Republicans, like we talked about, are in charge, it will take a while to reverse that pendulum. And usually these things come in cycle. And but so far the Republicans still seem to be gaining in strength, looks like, in Oklahoma.
And in addition to the congressional races and the state legislative races, a number of ballot measures will be before our voters on Tuesday. And one of them is drawing a lot of attention right now, having to do with the DHS. And there was a meeting yesterday of the DHS commissioners at which they decided to eventually close the Centers for Developmentally Disabled in Pauls Valley and Enid. And tell us about the ballot measure involving the DHS.
Well, that ballot measure basically would change the composition of the Department of Human Services Commission. And we abolished that commission, 9-member board, and then we'd set up 4 5-member advisory boards. It also would remove the director from being hired from the commission. The governor instead would hire the director. Now the title itself, the ballot issue itself, says that it will abolish the Department of Human Services agency, even though the legislation that was approved, that's put the matter on the ballot, never called for the abolishment of the agency. But there's a little dispute. The Attorney General's office rewrote it to fit legal, technical terms. And so there's some concern that, well, if you vote for it, what happens? Because if it passes, these ballot issues become effective a week after the election when the election board certifies the results. So if it definitely means the agency is abolished, well, what happens, mid-November? And that's one question mark. And of course, like you mentioned, closing these 2 centers, which has been talked about for years. The timing of it is kind of interesting. A week before the election, you would think that anybody in Enid and Paws Valley, or anyone who has family members who either work or are residents of those 2 centers, would give pause, even if they were thinking about voting for the change. Now are thinking, well, you know, is this a thing of things to come? The legislators aren't happy. There was a resolution passed in the House the last day of session advising the DHS Commission, don't do anything on these centers while the legislature's not in session. The Enid legislators are talking about, they're saying they're not done. They're going to, when the legislature reconvenes in February, they're going to see what they can do. They can see if they're going to try to block this DHS movement. Whether they can or not, of course, if the voters approve that state question, that becomes another myriad of what can they do. But it's really kind of thrown it on the garbage.
The
can,
timing
right?
is
garbage disposal.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Anything on voter registration? I mean, in terms of I'm sorry, turnout. Anything on turnout? Idea on what kind of percentage we're looking at for a presidential election?
Not yet. The state election board offices hates to really make predictions, but usually on presidential elections we'll see at least 60%. And I think that's true today. This year, I think Tuesday we'll see a pretty good turnout. Again, this morning, I was surprised that there's a line.
On Lincoln?
Mm-hmm.
At the state election board, you come down Lincoln, a lot of people in line.
They were waiting to vote. And I think that shows a lot of it. It's good to see democracy in action.
Can anybody just go out there today, Saturday and Sunday?
And Monday.
And Monday.
If you're a registered voter.
Registered voter, just show up at the county
election board. Oklahoma County. You go to your county election board, and if you're a registered voter, between 8 and 5, today and Monday, and I think 8 and noon on Saturday, you just make sure you have your voter identification. This will be the first presidential election year that our voter ID law has taken effect. That was passed 2 years ago. It took effect 2 years ago. And you have to have either a driver's license, some kind of government photo ID, or your voter identification card that the election board gives you. And if you don't have a voter card and you're a registered voter, they'll still let you vote, called a ballot, and you'll vote, and then after the election's over, the election board will check your registration. If you're registered, that will count in the final tally.
But bring your license.
Just be safe, because it's going to be a long line. No sense standing in line and not, having to go through a hassle. So either bring your driver's license or get your voter card, identification card, and new ones are mailed out this year, so everyone should have them. If not, you can go to the election board and get those.
Very good. Well, I'm sure it'll be a long night for us on Tuesday.
Because the bigger turnout, it's just going to take longer for the, and of course, even if the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Tuesday, but if you're in line at 7 o'clock, and you're safe.
Right.
So we may see people still voting at 7:30. I think 4 years ago we saw people still voting in St. Louis. I know they voted at 8 o'clock at night because they had some problems with the machines. So once you're in line, you vote. But if you show up at 7:01, they'll close the door and you're out of luck.
As long as you're in line by 7 o'clock. Well, very good. Tuesday night, keep track of us on News OK. Of course, read about us in the Oklahoman. We'll give you a full presentation of what's going on with all the vote totals, all the players, all the quotes. Thanks again for joining us. This is Rick Green and Michael McNutt.